My MIL stayed with us for 2 years rent-free, then sued us for elder support because we weren't giving her enough. I told him it's her or me. My mother-in-law stayed with us for 2 years rent-free, then sued us for elder support because we weren't giving her enough. I told him it's her or me. I married my husband Cole 7 years ago. His mother Francine made it clear from the start that she didn't approve of me. She thought her son could do better. She thought I wasn't pretty enough or smart enough or rich enough for her golden boy. She told Cole on our wedding day that he was making a mistake, and it wasn't too late to change his mind. He married me anyway, and Francine never forgave either of us for that. For the first 5 years of our marriage, Francine kept her distance. She lived 2 states away and only visited twice a year. Those visits were miserable but short. She criticized my cooking. She rearranged my cabinets. She told Cole I was letting myself go and he should encourage me to try harder. She asked when we were having kids and then said, I probably wasn't mother material anyway. I tolerated her because I loved my husband, and he always defended me after she left. Then Francine's husband passed away and everything changed. She called Cole crying and said she couldn't afford to live on her own anymore. She said her husband handled all the finances and left her with nothing but debt. She said she needed help or she'd end up on the street. Cole felt guilty because he hadn't been close with his father, and now it was too late. He asked if Francine could stay with us for a few months while she figured things out. I said yes because I thought it was temporary and I wanted to support my husband. That was 2 years ago. Francine never left. She moved into our guest room and immediately started acting like she owned the house. She complained about the temperature. She complained about the noise. She complained about what time we woke up and what time we went to bed. She rearranged my entire kitchen and got angry when I moved things back. She threw away food she didn't like and replaced it with things only she would eat. She used my bathroom products and told me I should buy better brands. She watched television at full volume until midnight, and then complained she couldn't sleep because of street noise. Cole tried to set boundaries, but Francine cried every time. She said she was a grieving widow and we were being cruel. She said she gave Cole everything when he was growing up, and now he couldn't even let her watch her shows in peace. She made him feel like the worst son in the world for asking her to use headphones. After 6 months, I started asking when Francine was planning to move out. She said she was looking at apartments, but everything was too expensive. She said her Social Security barely covered anything. She said we had plenty of room and she didn't understand why I wanted to kick an old woman out on the street. Cole said maybe we could help her find something affordable. Francine said she wasn't going to live in some rundown building with criminals and drug addicts. She said her son made good money and should be ashamed of not wanting to care for his own mother. Year 1 turned into year 2. I stopped cooking because Francine criticized everything I made. I stopped watching television in my own living room because she controlled the remote. I stopped having friends over because Francine made comments about them being loud and disrespectful. My house didn't feel like my home anymore. It felt like Francine's house, and I was just a guest who paid the mortgage. Then I found out about the lawsuit. Francine had been talking to a lawyer about filial responsibility laws. Some states have old laws that say adult children have to financially support their parents if the parents can't support themselves. Francine decided Cole wasn't giving her enough. She wanted a formal arrangement. She wanted guaranteed monthly payments. She wanted it in writing so we couldn't back out. She sued her own son for elder support. The papers came on a Tuesday. Cole was devastated. His mother was taking him to court demanding money while living rent-free in our house, eating our food, and using our utilities. She wanted $2,000 a month on top of everything we already provided. When Cole confronted her, Francine said she was just protecting herself. She said she couldn't trust us to keep taking care of her voluntarily. She said the lawsuit was nothing personal and we shouldn't be so sensitive about it. I sat in my kitchen listening to my mother-in-law explain why suing her son was actually a reasonable thing to do. That was when I decided I was done. I told Cole we needed to talk privately. I told him I loved him, but I couldn't live like this anymore. I told him his mother had to go or I would. He was torn, but I held firm. I said Francine created this situation by suing us, and now she had to live with the consequences. Either she dropped the lawsuit and moved out, or I was filing for divorce. Cole sits on our bed looking completely destroyed after I deliver the ultimatum, and I can see him trying to process that his mother's lawsuit has forced this impossible choice. He asks me if I really mean it about divorce. I tell him I've never been more serious about anything in my life. The look on his face breaks my heart, but I don't back down. He sits there with his head in his hands for what feels like forever, not saying anything. I watch his shoulders shake and realize he's crying. Part of me wants to comfort him, but the bigger part of me is so angry that we're even in this position. His mother sued us. She sued her own son while living in our house for free. I stand up and start gathering my pillow and phone charger. He looks up and asks where I'm going. I tell him I'm sleeping in the other guest room tonight because I can't be near him while he's still defending what his mother did to us. I sleep in the guest room down the hall from where Francine is staying because I can't bear to be near Cole while he's still defending his mother's right to sue us. That night, I hear Francine's television blaring until past midnight like always, and the sound fills me with cold rage. She's watching her shows at full volume like she has every right to keep me awake in my own house. I lie there staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of some game show, and I make a decision. Tomorrow I'm calling a lawyer whether Cole agrees or not. I'm done waiting for him to grow a backbone. I'm done being the reasonable one while his mother walks all over both of us. I grab my phone and start searching for family law attorneys in our area. I read reviews until 2 a.m, making a list of names. When I finally fall asleep, I dream about packing Francine's bags and leaving them on the curb. I wake up early and call my best friend Maya before work to tell her everything that happened with the lawsuit and my ultimatum. She answers on the second ring, and I can hear her getting ready for work in the background. I tell her about the lawsuit papers, about my ultimatum to Cole, about sleeping in the guest room. She's been listening to me complain about Francine for 2 years and immediately says she'll help me find a good family law attorney. She tells me to hold on while she texts her cousin who went through a nasty divorce last year. Within an hour, she texts me 3 names with reviews and says to call the first one today. I look at the names and see Eric Frost at the top of the list with a note that says he handles both divorce and elder law cases. Maya adds that her cousin said he's tough but fair, and he doesn't let people get pushed around. I save his number in my phone and feel something like hope for the first time in weeks. I take a sick day from work and call Eric Frost's office at 9 a.m, explaining I need urgent help with a filial responsibility lawsuit and potential divorce. The receptionist asks a few basic questions and I can hear her typing. She puts me on hold for what feels like forever but is probably only 2 minutes. When she comes back, she says, "Mr. Frost had a cancellation and can squeeze me in for a consultation that afternoon at 2 o'clock. I agree immediately, and she gives me the office address. I don't tell Cole where I'm going when I leave the house. He's in the kitchen drinking coffee and looking miserable, and Francine is already planted in front of the television. I grab my purse and keys and walk out without saying a word to either of them. Cole calls after me asking if we can talk later, but I just keep walking. Eric Frost listens to my entire story without interrupting, taking notes about the 2-year timeline, the rent-free living situation, and the lawsuit demanding $2,000 monthly. His office is small but neat, with law books lining one wall and framed degrees on another. He's maybe 50 with gray hair and sharp eyes that don't miss anything. He explains that filial responsibility laws exist in our state, but are rarely enforced, and Francine's case is particularly weak, given she's already receiving free housing and support. He says her lawsuit looks more like a power play than a legitimate legal need. I feel myself starting to relax for the first time since I saw those lawsuit papers. He asks if Francine has any documented disabilities or medical needs that would require our financial support. I tell him no, she's perfectly healthy and capable, she just doesn't want to spend her own money. He writes that down and nods slowly. Eric asks detailed questions about Francine's actual financial situation and whether we have any documentation of what she's contributed versus what we've provided. I realize we have 2 years of grocery receipts, utility bills, and mortgage payments showing she's paid absolutely nothing. She hasn't bought groceries or paid a single utility bill or contributed to the mortgage in 24 months. He says this evidence will be crucial and tells me to start gathering everything. He explains that filial responsibility cases require proof that the parent genuinely cannot support themselves and that the adult child has the means to help. If we can show that Francine has been living completely free while we cover all expenses, her claim that we're not providing enough support falls apart. I ask him about the divorce option, and he says we should try to resolve the mother-in-law situation first, but he can handle both if needed. I leave his office with a folder of intake paperwork and instructions to collect every financial document I can find. I come home from the lawyer's office feeling more empowered than I have in months, with a clear plan and professional support. Cole is sitting at the kitchen table looking like he hasn't slept, and Francine is watching her shows in the living room at maximum volume. I walk past both of them without saying a word and go straight to our home office to start collecting financial records. I pull out the file cabinet where we keep all our bills and receipts and start making piles. Mortgage statements go in one stack, utility bills in another, grocery receipts in a third. I find the folder where I've been keeping track of household expenses and flip through 2 years of records. Every single entry shows zero contribution from Francine. Not $1 toward food, electricity, water, internet, or housing. I start taking photos of everything with my phone to send to Eric. Cole follows me into the office and asks where I was all afternoon, his voice quiet and defeated. I tell him I met with a divorce attorney who also handles elder law, and I watch his face go pale. He starts to say something about how we should talk to his mother together, but I cut him off and say I'm done talking to Francine about anything. She sued us, I remind him. She's living in our house for free and she sued us for more money. What is there to talk about? He says maybe there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe she didn't realize how it would look. I laugh and it comes out harsh. I tell him there's no misunderstanding when you hire a lawyer and file legal paperwork. That's intentional. That's planned. He sits down in the desk chair and puts his head in his hands again. I keep sorting through financial records, taking photos, building my case. Francine knocks on our bedroom door with tears streaming down her face, saying she heard Cole and me arguing and she never meant to cause problems in our marriage. She says she'll drop the lawsuit if it means that much to us, but she has nowhere else to go and we're all she has left. Cole immediately softens and starts to comfort her, moving toward her like he's going to hug her. But I stand up and tell her the lawsuit is only part of the problem. She looks at me with those watery eyes, the same manipulation tactic she's used for 2 years. I see Cole wavering between us, and I know if I don't speak up right now, he's going to cave. She'll cry and promise to be better, and nothing will change. I've watched this exact scene play out a dozen times. She does something terrible, cries, and Cole forgives her because he feels guilty about his dad. I tell Francine directly that she's been a terrible houseguest for 2 years, that she's made me miserable in my own home, and that the lawsuit was just the final straw that made me stop tolerating her behavior. She gasps like I've slapped her and turns to Cole saying she can't believe he's letting me speak to her this way. Cole looks torn between us and I can see him wavering. I list everything she's done, the constant criticism, taking over my kitchen, controlling the television, making comments about my friends, refusing to pay for anything, acting like she owns the place. She interrupts to say she's a grieving widow and I'm being cruel. I tell her she's been using her grief as a weapon for 2 years and I'm done pretending that's okay. Cole makes a sound like he's in pain, but I keep going. I tell her she has money and options. She just doesn't want to use them because living here for free is easier. Her tears dry up fast when she realizes crying isn't working on me anymore. Francine's expression shifts and she switches her approach completely, her voice taking on that wounded tone she uses when tears aren't working. She starts talking about Cole's father, about how disappointed he would be to see his son abandoning his widowed mother like this. She brings up how Cole wasn't there when his father died, how he was too busy with work to visit enough in those final months, how he owes her for all the sacrifices she made raising him alone while his father worked long hours. I watch Cole's face crumble with guilt, see his shoulders slump forward like she's physically hitting him with each word. His jaw tightens and his eyes get wet, and I know exactly what's happening. I've seen this exact manipulation play out a dozen times over 2 years. She's going to make him feel like the worst son in the world, and he's going to cave and apologize and nothing will change. I can see him start to waver, see him opening his mouth to say something that will undo everything we just talked about. I interrupt before he can speak, and tell Francine directly that she's using his father's death to control him, and it's been working for 2 years. The words come out sharp and clear, and I don't soften them at all. I say we need to talk privately, and I ask Francine to leave our bedroom right now. She stares at me like I've lost my mind and says this concerns her too, that she has a right to hear what we're saying about her. She plants herself more firmly in the doorway and crosses her arms over her chest. My anger spikes to a level I didn't know I could reach, this white-hot rage that makes my hands shake. She's in my bedroom, in my house that I pay for, refusing to leave when I ask her to. I feel something snap inside me, some last thread of politeness or tolerance that's been holding me back. I tell Francine she has exactly 10 seconds to get out of my bedroom, or I'm calling the police to remove her from my house tonight. My voice doesn't shake even though my hands do. I start counting out loud. 1, 2, 3. Cole looks at me like he doesn't recognize me, shocked that I would threaten his mother this way. But I stare at Francine without blinking, holding my phone in my hand with my thumb hovering over the emergency call button. 4, 5, 6. She realizes I'm serious and her face goes red with anger and humiliation. 7, 8. She finally moves, backing out of the doorway while glaring at me with pure hatred. 9. She slams the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattle and I hear her start crying loudly in the hallway, these dramatic sobs that are clearly meant for Cole to hear. I lock the bedroom door and turn to face my husband. Cole and I have the most honest conversation we've had in 2 years. I sit on the edge of the bed and explain that I can't live like this anymore, that his mother's manipulation is destroying our marriage and destroying me. I tell him I love him, but I can't keep being the villain in his mother's story while she takes over my home and sues us for money. He sits down next to me and admits he knows his mother is difficult, that he sees how she acts. But he says he feels obligated to help her because his father just died, and he wasn't there enough at the end. His voice cracks when he talks about missing his father's final weeks. I take his hand and tell him there's a difference between helping someone and being exploited by them. I say Francine crossed that line 18 months ago, when it became clear she had no intention of ever leaving or contributing anything. She's not a grieving widow who needs temporary support. She's someone who saw an opportunity to live rent-free forever, and she's using guilt to keep it that way. I get up and pull out the folder from my meeting with Eric. I show Cole the notes I took, including the lawyer's assessment that Francine's lawsuit is legally weak and looks more like a power play than a legitimate need. Cole reads through everything slowly, his eyes moving over each page like he's trying to absorb what a legal professional thinks about his mother's actions. He reads the part where Eric said the lawsuit seems designed to establish control rather than address actual financial hardship. He looks up at me when he finishes and asks if I really think his mother is manipulating him on purpose, if I believe she's doing all this intentionally. I tell him I don't just think it, I know she is. I've watched her do it for 2 years. Every time he tries to set a boundary, she cries or brings up his father or makes him feel guilty until he backs down. That's not grief, I tell him. That's calculated behavior designed to get what she wants. The next morning, I call Eric's office and schedule another appointment, but this time I tell Cole he's coming with me. He needs to hear the legal reality directly from an attorney instead of filtered through my explanation. We drive to Eric's office in silence, Cole staring out the window the whole way. Eric sits us down in his conference room and explains filial responsibility cases in detail. He says these laws require proof that the parent is genuinely unable to support themselves and that adult children have the means to help. The parent has to demonstrate actual financial need, not just a preference for living rent-free. He looks at Cole directly and says, Francine's lawsuit will likely fail because she's already receiving substantial support from us and hasn't demonstrated any actual financial hardship. She's living in our house, eating our food, using our utilities, paying for nothing. A judge will see that and question why she needs $2,000 monthly on top of everything else. Eric asks if we've seen any documentation of Francine's actual finances since Cole's father died. Cole shifts in his chair and admits his mother has been really vague about her situation. She told him his father left her with nothing but debt, but she's never shown him any paperwork or bank statements. Eric nods like this is exactly what he expected to hear. He suggests we might want to investigate her actual financial status before responding to the lawsuit. He slides a business card across the table and says he knows a private investigator who specializes in financial backgrounds, someone who can compile a comprehensive report on Francine's real assets and income. I reach for the card immediately and say yes, let's do it. Cole looks uncomfortable and starts to protest. Cole argues that hiring an investigator feels like we don't trust his mother, like we're treating her like a criminal. I turn to him and say, that's exactly right. We don't trust her because she's suing us while living rent-free in our house. She's claiming poverty while refusing to show us any actual proof of her financial situation. Eric steps in gently and explains that in legal matters, verification is standard practice and not a personal attack. He says we need to know what we're dealing with before we can respond appropriately to her lawsuit. If she really is destitute like she claims, that's one thing. But if she has resources she's hiding, that changes everything. Cole sits there looking torn between loyalty to his mother and the logic of what Eric is saying. He rubs his face with both hands and asks what the investigator would actually do. Eric explains it's just background research, looking at public records, bank information if we can get access, property ownership, that kind of thing. Nothing illegal or invasive, just finding out the truth. Cole reluctantly agrees to let us move forward with the investigation, though I can tell it makes him deeply uncomfortable. We hire Nick Spears that same afternoon. He meets us at Eric's office and I give him everything we have about Francine. Her full name, date of birth, previous address, social security number from the lawsuit paperwork. Nick is maybe 50 with gray hair and a calm, professional manner that makes me trust him immediately. He explains his process and says he'll need about a week to compile a comprehensive report on her actual assets and income. He'll look at bank records, investment accounts, property ownership, any sources of income she might have. I feel this huge sense of relief wash over me as we shake hands, and he leaves. We're finally taking action instead of just reacting to whatever Francine throws at us. We're not just defending ourselves, we're finding out the truth. The week waiting for Nick's report is unbearable. Tension in the house reaches levels I didn't think were possible. Francine acts like a martyred victim every single moment. She makes pointed comments about being unwanted and unloved whenever I walk past her. She sighs dramatically when I'm in the same room. She tells Cole repeatedly that she's sorry for being such a burden, that she never meant to cause problems, that she'll just go live on the street if that's what we want. The performance is exhausting to watch. I start staying late at work just to avoid being home with her, finding excuses to run errands or visit Maya, or do anything that keeps me out of my own house. Cole tries to keep the peace by being extra nice to both of us. But it just makes everything more tense because Francine interprets his kindness as validation, that she's right and I'm wrong. Maya texts me the next morning asking if I'm okay, and I respond that I need to get out of the house before I lose my mind. She immediately offers her apartment as a refuge whenever I need space, saying she has a spare key I can use anytime. I take her up on it that same afternoon, driving to her place while Cole is at work, and Francine is watching her afternoon shows. Maya has wine and takeout waiting, and I spend 3 hours unloading everything about the lawsuit, the investigator, and the unbearable tension at home. She listens without interrupting and then tells me I'm not crazy, that Francine's behavior is completely unreasonable, and that any normal person would have hit their breaking point long ago. Hearing someone validate my feelings instead of telling me to be patient with a grieving widow makes me feel less alone in this nightmare. I go back to Maya's place 2 more times that week, once to sleep over when I can't stand another night in the same house as Francine, and once just to sit in peaceful silence without dramatic sighing or television blaring. Maya never makes me feel like a burden, and having this escape valve keeps me from completely falling apart while we wait for the investigator's report. On Thursday evening, Cole's phone rings while we're eating a tense, silent dinner with Francine dominating the living room television. He looks at the screen and his face changes. Then he excuses himself and takes the call in our bedroom. I hear his muffled voice through the door, the conversation lasting almost 20 minutes. When he comes back out, he looks shaken and asks if we can talk privately in the office. Francine immediately demands to know who called and what's wrong, but Cole ignores her and waits for me to follow him. He closes the office door and tells me that was his brother Patrick calling from Seattle. Patrick never calls unless something major is happening, and Cole thought maybe someone died. Instead, Patrick said he heard from their aunt that Francine was living with us and had sued Cole for money. Cole admits he's been avoiding telling Patrick about the situation because his brother has always been critical of their mother, and Cole didn't want to hear it. But now Patrick knows everything, and his response was immediate and blunt. Patrick told Cole he's not surprised at all because their mother has always been manipulative and controlling, and he moved across the country specifically to escape her toxic behavior. Cole looks stunned as he repeats Patrick's words, like he's hearing them for the first time even though I've been saying similar things for 2 years. Patrick apparently spent 15 minutes detailing incidents from their childhood and young adulthood, where Francine used guilt and tears to control both sons, making them feel responsible for her happiness. He described how she drove away Patrick's first serious girlfriend with constant criticism, then cried and said she was only trying to protect him from making a mistake. He talked about how she demanded Patrick change his college plans to stay closer to home, then acted like he'd betrayed her when he went to his dream school anyway. Patrick told Cole that Francine has a pattern of creating crises to keep her sons focused on her needs, and this lawsuit is just the latest version of the same manipulation. He warned Cole not to let their mother destroy his marriage the way she tried to destroy Patrick's relationships. Cole sits at the desk looking like his entire understanding of his family has shifted, and I can see him processing decades of behavior through a new lens. He keeps saying he always thought Patrick was cold and unfeeling toward their mother, that Patrick just didn't understand how hard things were for her after their father died. But now he's questioning whether Patrick saw something clearly that Cole has been blind to all along. I sit with him while he works through this revelation, not pushing or saying I told you so, just letting him come to his own conclusions. He finally looks at me and says Patrick asked him point blank whether he was going to choose his wife or his mother, and Patrick said the answer should be obvious. Cole says his brother told him that a man who doesn't protect his wife from his mother's abuse isn't much of a husband, and those words clearly hit hard. I watch my husband's image of his mother crack and shift, and while part of me feels vindicated, another part feels sad for him. He trusted Francine completely, and she's been manipulating that trust for years. The next morning, Nick calls with preliminary findings from his investigation, and his tone tells me this is big before he even starts explaining. Cole and I are both on speakerphone in the office, and Nick begins laying out what he's discovered about Francine's actual financial situation. She has over $200,000 in savings accounts and investment portfolios that she inherited when her husband died. The money is sitting in various accounts earning interest, completely accessible and more than enough to support independent living for years. Nick has bank statements showing regular deposits of Social Security and investment dividends, proving she has steady income beyond what she claimed. He found documentation of the life insurance payout from her husband's death, which was substantial and went directly into her accounts 2 years ago. Francine has been claiming poverty and desperation while sitting on a nest egg that would let her live comfortably in her own place. I feel my anger spike as Nick continues, because this means every tear and guilt trip about being destitute was a calculated lie. But Nick isn't finished. He also discovered that Francine owns her previous home outright, with no mortgage, and she's been renting it out to tenants for the past 2 years. She's collecting $1,500 every single month in rental income while living rent-free in our house and claiming she can't afford her own place. Nick has copies of the rental agreement, Property tax records showing her as the owner and bank deposits proving the monthly payments. She's been generating income and building her savings while telling us she had nothing and needed our support to survive. The evidence is documented in official records that can't be disputed or explained away. Cole asks Nick to email the full report immediately, his voice tight and controlled in a way that tells me he's barely holding back rage. Nick sends everything within minutes, and we open the attachment to see page after page of financial documentation proving Francine's deception. Cole reads through the investigator's report once, then again, then a third time, his face getting paler with each pass. He keeps stopping at certain sections and rereading them like he's hoping the words will change. He finally sets down the papers and just stares at the wall, saying he can't believe his mother would lie to him like this. He keeps looking for explanations, suggesting maybe she didn't understand her finances, or maybe the money is tied up somehow. I gently point out that the bank statements show she's been actively managing these accounts, transferring money between them and making investment decisions. She knows exactly what she has, and she's been deliberately hiding it from us while playing the helpless widow. Cole picks up the rental agreement documentation and studies it, seeing his mother's signature on contracts dated right before she moved in with us. She was setting up tenants to pay her monthly rent at the same time she was crying to Cole about being broke and homeless. The timeline makes the deception crystal clear and impossible to deny. I watch my husband's understanding of his mother shatter in real time, and despite everything she's put me through, I feel sad for him. He trusted her completely, and she betrayed that trust for money and control. I reach over and take his hand, and he squeezes it hard like he's holding on to something solid while his world shifts. I remind him that this is who Francine has always been, manipulative and self-serving, and he's just seeing it clearly now because we have proof she can't talk her way around. Cole nods slowly and says Patrick was right about everything, and he should have listened to his brother years ago. That evening, Cole walks into the living room where Francine is watching television and asks her to turn it off because they need to talk. She immediately looks suspicious and asks what's wrong, her voice taking on that wounded tone she uses when she senses criticism coming. Cole sits down across from her with the investigator's report in his hands and asks her directly to explain why she claimed to be destitute while having over $200,000 in the bank. Francine's face goes through a rapid series of changes, starting with shock that we know about the money, shifting to anger that we investigated her, and then settling into calculated tears. She says the money is for her future care and she can't touch it, that she needs to save it for when she's really old and sick. Cole points out that she's already claiming to need care now, which is why she sued us, so the explanation makes no sense. He asks about the rental income from her house, and Francine's tears stop abruptly as she switches to indignation. She accuses us of spying on her and violating her privacy, saying a good son would never investigate his own mother like she's some kind of criminal. Her voice rises as she demands to know who gave us the right to look into her personal finances. Cole stays calm and tells her that a good mother wouldn't sue her son while lying about being poor and homeless. He says she made her finances our business when she took us to court demanding money. Francine stands up and starts pacing, her whole demeanor changing from victim to aggressor. She says we have no idea what it's like to be her age and alone, that we're young and don't understand the fear of running out of money. Cole reminds her that she's not running out of money. She has hundreds of thousands of dollars in monthly income, and she's been lying to us for 2 years. Francine's face twists with anger, and she tells Cole he's being cruel and heartless, that his father would be ashamed of him. She brings up every sacrifice she ever made as a mother, every time she went without, so Cole could have something, every way she suffered for him. Cole listens to the guilt trip that has always worked before, and this time he doesn't cave. He tells her that being a good mother 30 years ago doesn't give her the right to lie and manipulate him now. Francine stares at him like she doesn't recognize her own son, and I can see her realize that her usual tactics aren't working anymore. She turns and storms toward her room, but instead of slamming the door, she pulls out her phone and calls someone right there in the hallway where we can hear everything. She asks for Cindy and says she needs to talk to her lawyer immediately. Francine's voice gets louder and more dramatic as she describes how we're being hostile and abusive, how we invaded her privacy and are now attacking her. She exaggerates everything that just happened, painting herself as a victim of elder abuse, and us as cruel children trying to steal her money. I hear her say we're trying to force her out on the street and she fears for her safety in this house. Cole stands frozen, listening to his mother lie to her lawyer about what just occurred, and his face shows devastation, mixed with an anger I've never seen him direct at Francine before. She ends the call and announces loudly that Cindy is proceeding with the lawsuit immediately, and adding claims about our abusive behavior. Francine looks at both of us with cold triumph, like she's won something, before finally going to her room and closing the door. I emailed the investigator's report to Eric that same night, and he called me back the next morning. His voice had energy I hadn't heard before when he told me this evidence destroyed Francine's entire case. He explained that filial responsibility laws only apply when parents genuinely can't support themselves, and Francine had over $200,000 in assets plus monthly rental income. He started drafting our response immediately, pulling together all the financial documentation Nick had uncovered, along with our records of providing free housing, food, and utilities for 2 years. Eric said we weren't just going to fight the lawsuit, we were going to request dismissal with prejudice and make Francine pay our legal fees. He walked me through the response document over the phone, reading sections that detailed every dollar Francine had hidden while claiming poverty. The legal language was cold and precise, listing her bank accounts, investment portfolios, rental property income, and Social Security benefits. Eric included our utility bills, grocery receipts, and mortgage statements, showing exactly what we'd provided while she contributed nothing. He said judges hated this kind of deception, and Francine's lawyer would likely advise her to drop the case once they saw the evidence. I hung up feeling like I could breathe properly for the first time in weeks. 3 days later, Francine received our legal response by certified mail, and I watched her sign for the thick envelope from the window. She took it to her room, and I heard nothing for almost an hour. Then she came out looking pale and shaken, the papers clutched in her hand. She found Cole in the kitchen and started talking about chest pains, saying the stress was too much and she couldn't breathe right. Her hand went to her chest and she leaned against the counter, her breathing getting faster. Cole immediately went to her side asking what was wrong, and Francine said we were killing her with our cruelty. She said her heart couldn't take this kind of treatment and she might need to go to the hospital. Tears streamed down her face as she described how the pain was spreading down her arm, and I stood there knowing she was faking but unable to prove it. Cole looked terrified and said he was taking her to the emergency room right now. I told him she was manipulating him, that this was just another act to make us feel guilty. Francine gasped and said she was dying, and her own daughter-in-law thought she was lying. Cole grabbed his keys and helped his mother to the car while I followed them out, still protesting that this was fake. The emergency room was packed with people who had real problems, and Francine got checked in with complaints of chest pain and arm numbness. They took her back immediately because hospitals don't mess around with potential heart attacks, and Cole went with her while I sat in the waiting area. 4 hours passed while they ran tests, hooked her up to machines, drew blood, and did an EKG. I scrolled through my phone reading about manipulation tactics and fake medical emergencies, getting angrier with each article. Finally, a doctor came out and asked to speak with Cole privately, and I followed them to a small consultation room. The ER doctor explained that all of Francine's tests came back normal, her heart was fine, and there was no evidence of a cardiac event. He said she was experiencing anxiety, which can cause chest tightness and rapid breathing that feels like a heart attack. He recommended she follow up with her regular doctor and maybe consider therapy for stress management. Cole looked relieved that his mother wasn't dying, but I saw confusion on his face too. The doctor left and Cole asked Francine why she didn't mention she was feeling anxious instead of saying her heart was failing. Francine got defensive and said she knows her own body and the doctors must have missed something. The hospital sent us home with discharge papers and a bill that hit our insurance for thousands. Our portion came to $800 in copays and deductibles for tests that found absolutely nothing wrong. I got the billing statement 2 weeks later and felt rage burn through my chest looking at the charges. Francine had manufactured an emergency to gain sympathy, and it cost us $800 we didn't have while she was actively suing us for more money. I showed Cole the bill and watched his face as he processed that his mother's fake crisis had real financial consequences. He didn't say anything, just stared at the paper with his jaw tight. The drive home from the hospital had been quiet, with Francine in the back seat complaining that the doctors didn't take her seriously. Cole had responded with short answers instead of his usual reassurance, and I could tell something was shifting in how he saw her behavior. He was starting to recognize the pattern even when he didn't want to admit it out loud. I called Maya the next day and told her about the hospital incident, and she listened to the whole story before saying I needed to start documenting everything. She explained that if this went to court, or if I actually filed for divorce, having a record of Francine's manipulation would be important evidence. Maya suggested I buy a journal and write down every incident with dates, times, and specific details of what Francine said and did. I stopped at a store on my way home and bought a plain notebook, then sat down that night and started writing. I documented the fake heart attack with the date, time, what Francine said, how Cole reacted, and the $800 bill. Then I went back through my memory and wrote down other incidents from the past 2 years, filling pages with her criticism, her controlling behavior, and her emotional manipulation. The act of writing it all down made me feel less powerless, like I was taking back control by creating a record that couldn't be denied. Each entry was a piece of evidence that I wasn't crazy or cruel, that Francine's behavior was real and harmful and documented. Called me the following week saying Francine's lawyer Cindy had contacted him about settlement discussions. Cindy suggested we could avoid court if we agreed to a smaller monthly payment of $1,000 instead of the $2,000 Francine originally demanded. Eric's voice was firm when he told me he'd already advised rejecting the offer because we had proof Francine didn't need any financial support. He said settling would be admitting she had a valid claim when our evidence showed she was lying about her financial situation. I told Eric to refuse the settlement and push for complete dismissal of the lawsuit. I wanted Francine's case thrown out, not negotiated down to a smaller number. Eric agreed and said he would tell Cindy we weren't interested in any settlement that involved us paying Francine money she didn't need. He would counter with our demand for dismissal and recovery of our legal fees. I hung up feeling strong in my decision, knowing that giving Francine even $1 would validate her manipulation. Cole came home that evening and I told him about the settlement offer and my decision to reject it. I expected him to push back or suggest we consider it, but instead he nodded slowly and said I was right. He told me to let Eric know he supported fighting the lawsuit and including our request for legal fees. I watched his face as he said it, seeing how much the decision cost him emotionally. His mother had raised him, and now he was choosing to fight her in court instead of giving her what she wanted. But he was making that choice, picking our marriage over his mother's manipulation. I reached across the table and took his hand, and he squeezed back without saying anything. That moment felt like a turning point, like Cole was finally willing to stand up to Francine even when it hurt. Francine found out we rejected the settlement 2 days later when Cindy called her with the news. I was upstairs when I heard Francine on the phone in the living room, her voice getting louder and more upset. She was asking Cindy how we could refuse such a reasonable offer, saying $1,000 a month was barely anything. Then she started making calls to Cole's extended family, relatives we saw maybe once a year at holidays. I listened from the top of the stairs as she told his Aunt Susan that we were trying to make her homeless, that we refused to care for her in her old age. She called his cousin Jennifer and said we were cruel and heartless, that Cole had turned against his own mother. Over the next few days, my phone started ringing with calls from family members I barely knew, all of them wanting to shame Cole for being a bad son. His uncle Mark called and lectured him for 20 minutes about family obligation. His cousin Noah sent a long text about how disappointed he was. Francine had started a full smear campaign, spreading her version of events to anyone who would listen. Patrick called Cole's phone 3 days into the family drama, and Cole put him on speaker so I could hear. Patrick said he'd gotten calls from several relatives about what was happening, and he wanted Cole to know he'd told them all the truth. He explained about Francine's hidden assets, the rental income, the $200,000 in savings she'd lied about. Patrick said he backed up Cole's position publicly and told the family that Francine was manipulating them, just like she'd manipulated Cole for years. Some relatives called back to apologize after hearing Patrick's side, admitting they should have asked more questions before judging. Others chose to believe Francine anyway, saying Patrick and Cole were both terrible sons who abandoned their mother. The family split into camps, some supporting us and others supporting Francine's lies. Cole thanked his brother for standing up for him, and Patrick said he wished he'd done it sooner instead of just keeping his distance. The stress of living with Francine while fighting her lawsuit was destroying what was left of my marriage to Cole. We barely talked anymore except about legal strategy and court dates. Every conversation circled back to his mother and the case, and we couldn't find anything else to discuss. We hadn't been intimate in weeks because I couldn't stand the idea of being close to him while Francine was down the hall ruining our lives. I felt like roommates who shared a legal problem instead of husband and wife who loved each other. One night I told Cole we needed to start marriage counseling immediately, or I was going to follow through on my divorce threat. I said the lawsuit would end eventually, but our marriage wouldn't survive without help. Cole looked at me with tired eyes and asked if I really thought counseling could fix this. I told him I didn't know, but I knew doing nothing would definitely end us. He agreed to call a therapist the next day. Therapist's office had a waiting room that smelled like lavender and old magazines. I sat next to Cole on a gray couch while we waited for Layla Castro to call us back. He kept checking his phone, and I kept staring at the motivational poster on the wall about communication being the key to healthy relationships. When Layla opened her door and called our names, I felt my stomach twist because I knew this was either going to save us or prove we were already too broken to fix. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes and a calm voice that made me want to trust her immediately. We sat down on opposite ends of her couch, and she asked us to explain why we were there. Cole looked at me like he wanted me to start, so I did. I told her about Francine living with us for 2 years rent-free, about the lawsuit, about my ultimatum. Layla listened without interrupting and took notes on a yellow pad. She asked Cole how he felt about everything I'd said, and he admitted he felt torn between his mother and his wife. He said he knew Francine was difficult, but she was still his mother, and he felt guilty about his father's death. Layla nodded and asked him why he felt responsible for something he couldn't control. Cole didn't have a good answer for that. The court date arrived 6 weeks later on a Wednesday morning in early October. Eric met us outside the courthouse at 8:30 wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather briefcase full of evidence. Francine showed up alone 10 minutes before the hearing started, wearing a black dress that made her look smaller and older than usual. She didn't have a lawyer with her because Cindy Aldrich had dropped her as a client. I watched Francine walk into the courtroom looking scared and out of her depth, and part of me almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The judge was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She reviewed Eric's motion to dismiss while we all sat in silence. Eric had included everything in his filing. The bank statements showing Francine's $200,000 in savings, the property records proving she owned a rental house generating $1,500 monthly, the receipts and bills documenting 2 years of free housing, food, and utilities we'd provided. The judge looked at Francine and asked if she had legal representation. Francine said no in a small voice. The judge asked if she wanted to respond to the evidence presented. Francine started crying and said she just wanted her son to take care of her like a good son should. The judge looked unimpressed. She reviewed the financial documents for another 10 minutes while Francine cried quietly into a tissue. Then the judge dismissed the lawsuit with prejudice and ordered Francine to pay our legal fees. The whole hearing lasted 28 minutes. Walking out of the courthouse into the October sunshine, I felt like I could breathe properly for the first time in 2 years. The lawsuit was over. We won. Francine couldn't sue us again because the dismissal was with prejudice. Cole looked relieved but sad, and I knew he was dealing with complicated feelings about his mother being humiliated in court. I took his hand and told him I was proud of him for standing up to her. He squeezed my hand back and said he hoped he'd done the right thing. Francine had 45 days left on her eviction notice. She spent them moving through our house like a ghost, barely speaking to either of us. She packed her belongings slowly, one box every few days, making pointed comments about being thrown out like garbage. I heard her on the phone with relatives telling them we were forcing her onto the street. I ignored her completely and focused on reclaiming my home space by space. I started with the kitchen, moving everything back to where I wanted it after 2 years of her rearranging. I threw away her specialty foods and restocked with things Cole and I actually liked. I cleaned out the bathroom she'd taken over and replaced all my products she'd used up. Every small act of reclaiming felt like taking back a piece of myself. Maya came over one Saturday to help me research senior living options for Francine. We sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and looked at independent apartments in her price range using her actual financial resources. We found a nice one-bedroom in a building with other seniors, close to shopping and a medical clinic. The rent was $1,200 a month, well within what Francine could afford with her Social Security and rental income. I printed out the information and left it on the kitchen counter. Francine threw it away without looking at it. I printed more copies and left them in her room. She threw those away too. I kept printing and leaving them until she finally stopped throwing them out. Patrick called Cole a week before Francine's move-out deadline and offered to help their mother find an apartment. He said he wanted to try rebuilding some family connection, even though Francine had been awful to him for years. Cole put the call on speaker so I could hear. Patrick told Francine he would fly out and help her apartment hunt if she would accept his help. Francine told him he was just as ungrateful as Cole, and she didn't need anything from either of her terrible sons. Patrick said he tried, and at least now Cole couldn't be accused of abandoning their mother without offering support. Cole thanked his brother and hung up looking sad but less guilty. 2 weeks before the deadline, Eric called and said he'd connected us with Valerie Howe, a social worker who worked with seniors needing housing placement. Valerie called Francine directly and somehow convinced her to meet for coffee. I don't know what Valerie said to her, but Francine agreed to look at apartments. Valerie found her a beautiful one-bedroom in a secure building with other seniors, walking distance to a grocery store and doctor's offices. The building had activities and a community room where residents could socialize. Francine signed the lease with obvious anger and resentment, but she signed it because she had no other options. Her move-out date was in 12 days. Moving day came on a Saturday morning in late November. Cole hired professional movers to pack and transport everything. I stayed out of the way and let them work. Francine supervised the movers with tight lips and cold eyes, directing them where to put boxes. She didn't say goodbye to me when she left. She barely looked at Cole. He tried to hug her and she turned away. The movers loaded the last box into their truck and drove away with Francine following in her car. Cole stood in the driveway watching her leave, and I saw tears on his face. I knew this hurt him even though it was necessary. I put my arm around him and we went back inside our empty, quiet house. That first night without Francine felt strange and wonderful at the same time. I walked through every room just breathing in the peace and silence. No television blaring, no complaints about temperature or noise, no criticism or manipulation. Just our home, Finally ours again. I moved things back to where I wanted them. I opened windows to air out the guest room. I stood in my kitchen and felt like I owned it again. Cole and I ordered Chinese takeout and ate dinner in our living room watching a movie we picked together at a normal volume. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. We were just existing in our own space without walking on eggshells or managing someone else's emotions. Over the next few weeks, Cole and I kept going to counseling with Layla. We talked about the resentment that had built up over 2 years of living with Francine. We talked about how Cole's guilt over his father's death had made him vulnerable to his mother's manipulation. We talked about boundaries and how we would handle family situations differently in the future. Layla helped us see patterns we'd fallen into and gave us tools to communicate better. We agreed that no one would ever live with us again without a clear timeline and a written agreement. We agreed that our marriage came first, before extended family obligations. Cole apologized for not protecting me sooner from his mother's behavior. I forgave him because I understood he'd been trapped in guilt and manipulation he didn't know how to escape. I decided to transform the guest room that had been Francine's into the home office I'd always wanted. I bought paint in a soft blue color that had nothing to do with her. Cole helped me paint on a Sunday afternoon, both of us in old clothes covered in paint splatters. We moved in a new desk and comfortable chair. I hung artwork I loved on the walls. I set up my computer and organized my supplies. The transformation felt like more than just redecorating. It felt like reclaiming my home and my life from someone who'd tried to take both away from me. Cole stood in the doorway when we finished and said he was glad to see me happy in our house again. I realized I was happy. Actually, genuinely happy in a way I hadn't been in 2 years. And 3 months passed since the moving truck drove away with Francine's belongings. Cole started visiting her apartment every Sunday for dinner. He told me about it the first time he went, explaining he wanted to keep some kind of relationship with his mother even after everything that happened. I understood because I knew he was still her son even if she'd tried to destroy our marriage. He set clear rules before that first visit. No discussing the lawsuit, no criticizing me, no guilt trips about the eviction. If Francine broke any of those boundaries, he would leave immediately without argument. The first Sunday dinner lasted about 40 minutes before Francine made a comment about how I probably enjoyed having the house to myself without her there to help maintain it. Cole stood up, thanked her for the meal, and walked out. The second Sunday went better. Francine kept the conversation neutral, asking about Cole's work and talking about her new neighbors. Cole stayed for 2 hours and came home saying it felt almost normal. Over the next few months, Francine learned that Cole actually meant what he said about boundaries. When she tested him by mentioning the lawsuit, he gathered his coat and left. When she suggested I was controlling him, he reminded her of the rule and said he'd leave if she continued. She started behaving better because she realized her son would actually follow through on consequences instead of just threatening them. I never asked Cole to stop visiting his mother. I knew he needed some kind of relationship with her, even if I wanted nothing to do with Francine myself. The weekly dinners seemed to help him process his guilt about the whole situation, without letting his mother back into our daily lives. Maya called me on a Friday afternoon suggesting we take a girls' weekend away to celebrate my victory over Francine. I hadn't realized how much I needed time with friends until she mentioned it. For 2 years, I'd avoided having people over because Francine made everything uncomfortable with her comments and criticism. Maya booked us a hotel room 2 hours away with a spa and nice restaurants. We left Saturday morning and spent the whole weekend talking, laughing, and just enjoying each other's company without anyone judging us or making passive-aggressive remarks. I got a massage that worked out tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders for months. We ate dinner at a restaurant where I could order whatever I wanted without someone criticizing my choices. We stayed up late watching movies at a reasonable volume and nobody complained about the noise. Sunday afternoon when we drove home, I felt lighter and more like myself than I had in years. I realized how much Francine's presence had isolated me from my support system. I'd stopped inviting friends over, stopped going out, stopped doing things I enjoyed because it was easier than dealing with her complaints. Coming back refreshed made me grateful for people like Maya who stuck by me even when I withdrew. Cole noticed the difference immediately when I walked in the door. He hugged me and said I seemed like myself again for the first time since his mother moved in with us. And I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd lost trying to keep peace in my own home. Cole and I had our regular counseling session with Layla the following week. We'd been seeing her for months now, working through the damage Francine's presence and lawsuit had caused our marriage. This session felt different from all the others. We sat on Layla's comfortable couch and she asked us to reflect on everything we'd been through since Francine moved out. Cole talked about how guilty he'd felt choosing me over his mother, but how he understood now that protecting our marriage wasn't cruel or selfish. He said he'd been so focused on his guilt about his father's death that he let his mother manipulate him into accepting unacceptable behavior. I talked about how close I'd come to actually filing for divorce and how scared I was that I'd lost Cole to his mother's control. Layla helped us see patterns we'd fallen into over 2 years of living with Francine. We'd stopped communicating honestly because we were always managing his mother's emotions. We'd stopped prioritizing our relationship because all our energy went to keeping peace. We'd stopped being a team because Francine had driven a wedge between us with her constant manipulation. Layla pointed out how much stronger our marriage was now compared to 6 months ago. We'd learned to communicate better, set boundaries together, and put our relationship first. Cole apologized for not protecting me sooner from his mother's behavior. He said he should have seen what was happening and put a stop to it before things got so bad. I forgave him because I understood he'd been genuinely trapped in manipulation he didn't know how to escape. His mother had spent his whole life training him to feel guilty for having boundaries, and breaking free from that programming took time and help. 6 months after Francine moved out, Cole and I were genuinely happy together. Our house finally felt like our home again instead of a place where we walked on eggshells. We hosted friends for dinner parties without worrying about criticism or complaints. We watched television together on our couch at whatever volume we wanted. We slept peacefully through the night without drama or manufactured emergencies. We made plans for our future without considering how his mother's interference might affect them. Cole kept up his weekly Sunday dinners with Francine, and she stayed mostly within the boundaries he'd set. Their relationship would never be warm or close, but they maintained contact on terms that protected our marriage. Francine was settled in her apartment, living off her own substantial resources. The investigator's report had proven she never needed our financial support. She'd been sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars while claiming poverty and suing her son for monthly payments. I still felt angry when I thought about her deception, but mostly I felt relieved that she was out of my life. I learned that standing up for myself wasn't cruel even though Francine tried to make me feel that way. Setting boundaries wasn't selfish even when someone cried and called me heartless. Sometimes love means refusing to be destroyed by someone else's manipulation. I almost lost my marriage trying to be accommodating and understanding. I almost lost myself trying to keep everyone happy. Drawing a hard line and saying either she goes or I do was the scariest thing I'd ever done, but it saved everything that mattered to me.